Hello everyone, today we're going to look at Terraform. Terraform has been around for some time. It's a way for you to provision infrastructure through your code, and it uses the HCL or Hashicorp Configuration Language to define the specifications of your infrastructure. But what if you'd want to use your favorite programming language, right? Something that Pulumi does. So Pulumi is another tool that is also IAC or infrastructure through code. It allows you to create your infrastructure through your favorite programming language. I think Pulumi has around 4 or 5. I'm not sure. But what if you're like a Terraform fanboy? You'd want to use Terraform. Actually, Terraform has created a solution for that. So if you'd want to use Terraform but don't want to use their HCL or Hashicorp configuration language, then you may want to take a look at this GitHub repo. So this is Terraform CDK. This is a solution that Hashicorp has come up with for you to create Hashicorp Terraform specifications using your favorite programming language. It currently supports 5. So we have Typescript, which is my favorite programming language, by the way. We got Python, Java, C#, and Go. I'm going to link this repo down below if you guys are interested in taking a look at it. But let's take a look at Terraform CDK. The first thing we're going to have to do is install it. So you'd want to go to your terminal. We're at the terminal, and I do advocate for WSL or Windows Subsystem for Linux. I just think it makes your life a lot easier if you're working with code projects, although you could use Windows as well. But currently, we're going to use WSL to configure our workspace to use Terraform CDK. So the first thing you want to do is we're going to install through npm. We want to do a sudo npm install, and the autocomplete has already got me -g CDKTF CLI at latest. And then we're just going to have to wait for that to install properly. Okay, so after installation, you want to do CDKTF version. I believe CDK means Cloud Development Kit Terraform, I think. But anyway, if you run CDKTF version and you get an output like this, then you should be good. Or you can just run CDKTF and then you're going to see all the options you have when running this CLI. So we're going to clear that. So the next thing we're going to install is the AWS CLI. So we're going to be using AWS as our cloud provider to provision infrastructure. The first thing we got to do is sudo apt install unzip, because this will be helpful later. Okay, so turns out I already have that installed. So if you don't, please install this. Now what you want to do is you want to copy this command. Again, I'll attach this below. And we're just basically curling this link to output it to our local directory, right? So we're going to curl it. We're going to wait for it to download. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we're going to run the unzip command, and we're going to specify the file, which is this AWS CLI v2.zip. So AWS CLI v2.zip. And then the final thing is we're going to do a sudo.aws install. All right, so I've actually installed the AWS CLI beforehand. I used it in my work, in my daily work. So you guys might have a different message, but to see if you installed the AWS CLI correctly, you want to do AWS -- version. Right, so you're going to have an output like this. So the first thing I want you guys to do is, let me clear this, is we're going to have to run AWS configure. So you're going to want an AWS account to go with this. Their free tier is fairly nice, in my opinion. There's a lot of things you could do in free tier, but that build just does creep up on you if you don't look. So you'd want to provide your access key ID here. The permission will really depend on the infrastructure we're provisioning. We're just going to do some basic S3 buckets, and there's like a bonus after on like how we could use Terraform, AWS, and their CDKTF to basically provision X number of buckets, like 100 or 1,000 buckets. I know we're capped at 100 buckets per account, but assuming if you have like 1,000 buckets, you could pretty much do that. So that's like a bonus thing at the end of the video. So you'd provide your key ID here, secret access key here, which I've already done beforehand, and then your region name. Mine is AP Southeast 1 because I'm in Asia, and default output format, you can leave that here. So once that's done, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to VS Code. I'm at VS Code, and we're going to attempt to provision an EC2 instance using Terraform, which will allow us to write TypeScript code to provision our infrastructure. So navigate to a directory that you're comfortable with. I'm in the Terraform directory. It's just a blank directory at the moment. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a project folder. So we're going to run the makedir command for us to create a blank directory again. So mkdir aws-terraform. We're going to cd into that blank directory. And then for us to bootstrap the CDKTF project, we're going to utilize the CLI that we installed a while ago, the CDKTF CLI. So we're going to run CDKTF init -- template equals Typescript -- local. So providing the -- local flag just informs CDKTF that we'd like to store the state of our infrastructure locally. So there is a option for you to be able to store the state of your infrastructure remotely, but for this case, we're not going to do that. And you also provide the Typescript template. So like I said, CDKTF has many languages, I think 5, Java, C#, etc. So look into that on your free time, but in this case, we're going to be using Typescript as our template. Okay, so you're going to be prompted for the project name. By default, this is going to take the name of the directory you're in. In this case, it's AWS-Terraform, which is the directory we created a while ago. So you may click enter here. You can provide a description. We're just going to click enter here. And then send a crash report. You can just click enter here. So we're just going to wait for that to resolve. It's going to bootstrap our project and install the necessary dependencies. All right, so once that's finished, you're going to be greeted with a message like this. So these are the different providers currently that CDKTF supports. You can see there's AWS, there's Google, there's Azure, there's Docker, there's GitHub, and there's null. I have no idea what the null provider is, but we're not going to look into that today. So since we're going to be using AWS as our cloud provider, it would be helpful if you could run the npm install at cdktf /provider-aws command. So this will install the dependencies we need to use the AWS provider for CDKTF. All right, so once that's resolved correctly, you'd want to take a look at your directory that you created a while ago, which was previously blank. If everything was done correctly, you may notice that it's been populated with some files. So these files were the files that were bootstrapped by the CDKTF command line interface a while ago. So let's take a look at the main.ts file. We're just gonna reduce the size of our terminal here. So this is the main.ts file. So any code that you would write to provision some infrastructure should be written here. So all this is it's just under the hood. It's a Node.js project. So we can use the Node modules that comes with Node.js by default, and we are going to be using those. So for us to provision an EC2 instance, I'm just going to outline the steps here in comments. So the first thing we need to do is generate an SSH key first. This will help us with authenticating to our EC2 instance that we provision. And then we're going to create an EC2 key pair. This will let AWS know our public key. And then finally, we're going to create an EC2 instance, right? So the first thing we have to do is we're going to generate the SSH key. So how do we do that? So if you're using the Ubuntu distribution for WSL or Windows subsystem for Linux, let me just clear this here. You can generate your own SSH keys by just running the ssh-keygen command. So we're going to run that here, click enter. And by default, it's going to save the SSH keys in this .ssh directory id_rsa as the file name. So we're going to click enter here. As you can see, I already have a public key, but we're just going to overwrite it. So I'm just going to write Y and then click enter. Enter a passphrase. You can provide a passphrase here, but for me, I'm not going to. So I can click enter here. Enter the same passphrase again. Just click enter here. I didn't provide any passphrase. And then at this point, the SSH keys has been generated, right? So we can clear this. Let's just minimize the terminal a little bit so to help with visibility. So we're just gonna go into the code now. So the first thing we have to do is we're going to import the AWS provider from @CDKTF provider AWS. So after that, we're going to get the path, and then we're going to read the contents of our public key that we generated a while ago, right? By the ssh-keygen command. So we're going to get the key path, const key path equals os.home dir plus, and we're going to add a string here, .ssh id under our underscore rsa.pub. So make sure that you suffix this file with .pub. So this is your public key that you're passing in, not your private key. I did notice that an error does happen when you just remove the .pub and pass in your private key, but you just want to make sure that the .pub suffix or the file extension is there. So at this point, the key path is just the path to the key that we generated, right? So we need to read the contents of that. And for us to do that, we just declare const public key is equal to fs.read file sync. And then we pass in the key path here, and then we pass in the encoding of UTF-8. So this variable, the public key variable, is basically the contents of our key path or the public key that we generated a while ago. We declare a new AWS provider. We pass in this, the class that we're currently in, the context of that. We give it an ID of AWS and then pass in some options. We're going to pass in the region, so feel free to provide your own region that you're living in or you want to use. In my case, I'm going to just pass in AP-Southeast-1. And then here we're going to actually create the key pair now. So for us to be able to create the EC2 key pair, or basically let AWS know of the public key that we can use for authentication, we just declare const key pair equals new EC2.keyPair. Passing this, give it an ID. In this case, we can just call it key pair. And then we pass in the public key. So we don't have to do it like this, where we declare the key and the value of the variable. Because of ES6, we can just do it like this. We define the key name. You can name this any key. Maybe I'll just name this like CDKTF key. Right, so this will create our key pair, basically upload the public key to AWS. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create an EC2 instance, right? So at this stage, we're creating the key pair. The next thing we need to do is to create an EC2 instance. So how do we go about that? So we declare a variable called instance, const instance. Oops, sorry. I just noticed that this is actually not the right spelling. I'm an idiot. Okay, so const key pair and const instance equals to new EC2.instance. Pass in this. Give it an ID, compute, and then we're going to provide some options, right? So these options will be the AMI. Let me just tab it out. So AMI, you can provide a string. So this AMI is basically an identifier for AWS EC2 instances. We're going to provide this. This is the AMI for Ubuntu 20.04 LTS. We're going to declare the instance type as T2 micro because these are expensive. So we're just going to declare the free tier one here. And then we have to pass in a key name. So this key name is basically what we get from this key pair variable, right? So how we get the name of the key is either you can just declare this in a variable and pass it in here, or you can just declare the key pair and then get the property of key name here, right? So after that, how do we get the IP address of this EC2 instance, right? So for us to be able to get the IP address of the created EC2 instance, we're going to have to utilize the Terraform output. So new Terraform output, pass in this ID of public IP, and then we assign a value. In this case, it's going to be the variable of instance dot public IP, right? And this will log out when we apply these changes to our AWS cloud. It's going to log out the public IP so we can SSH into it. So we're going to save. Hello everyone. So I had some issues with VS Code a while ago, but you should be seeing something like this, right? We're going to import these missing dependencies again. I had some issues a while ago. So import from FS, import OS, import all as FS from FS, import all as OS from OS, and then we're going to be left with these errors. So we're going to import EC2 as well. from the provider AWS. So import EC2 here. Oh, sorry. So comma here and Terraform output. So the Terraform output comes from the CDKTF dependency. We just have to import it here. So Terraform output. Right. So we should have no errors. Awesome. So these are the code. Oh, let me just rewrite that. So to summarize, we've generated a key pair. We've declared some variables here to basically read the contents of our public key. We're declaring a new AWS provider with a region, so you can select your own region here. For this variable const key pair, we're creating a new AWS key pair for us to be able to authenticate to the EC2 instance. We're providing the contents of the public key through this function here, fs.readFileSync. And then we're declaring the name as CDKTF-key. You can declare yours as any name as you'd like. For the EC2 instance, so we're creating a new EC2.instance, providing an ID of compute, and then providing an AMI. So this AMI, I'm using the Ubuntu 20.04 LTS version. You can choose any distribution or AMI that you want. We're going to use the t2.micro instance type, and then we're going to specify here the key name, right? Since we did provide a key pair, the property key name will contain the name of the key, as implied, which is CDKTF-key. And then finally, we're going to log out the IP address of the EC2 instance here by accessing the public IP property of instance, which is this variable here. So for us to deploy this, we just have to run cd. We have to cd into the directory first. I've made this mistake so many times where I would just run cdktf deploy on the root directory, and that won't work. I was struggling. So cdktf deploy, and then we're just gonna wait for that to synthesize. All right, so after all of that, you may review the plan. This is similar to if you would run Terraform apply if you use HCL or the Hashicorp Configuration Language. So feel free to inspect the changes that's going to happen on your AWS cloud. So in this case, we know exactly what we're doing, and make sure your public key looks like this, right? So this is what a public key would look like. If this was longer and there was there's usually a prefix of OpenSSH key begin or something like that, you're selecting your private key. So make sure that you're passing in the .pub of the file name of your SSH key, just so you're passing in the public key and not the private key. Anyway, we're just gonna click enter here that we want to approve these changes, and we're deploying the stack. All right, so it's creating the necessary infrastructure. So it's creating the key pair, it's creating the EC2 instance, which is a T2 micro. I'm using Ubuntu 20.04. Let me recheck. 20.04 LTS. So we're just gonna wait for that to provision. All right, so once everything's finished, you're going to be met with apply complete, resources to added, which is the EC2 key pair and the EC2 instance, and this is the IP. So how do we actually SSH into this EC2 instance that we just created, right? Just to verify that we're not, we didn't do anything wrong. So what you want to do, since we've passed in our SSH key, we can simply just do an SSH and then pass in the IP address. So 54.179.149.47. Oh, sorry. It's 46, so it's supposed to be 47 actually. Okay, so that one. So you're gonna get a prompt here with a fingerprint. So we're gonna click, we're just gonna write yes, enter. Right, so if your terminal looks like that, Ubuntu at IP, and then basically you've logged into your EC2 instance successfully. So congratulations, you just provisioned an EC2 instance using AWS Terraform and CDKTF for infrastructure as code. So you may notice that we're not really using our code capabilities here, right? So we're not really doing some custom logic, some if statements. So I'm going to provide a demonstration on some really fun things you can do after this section here. So we're going to provision an X amount of S3 buckets. So see you in the next section. Hello, everyone. So I bootstrapped another CDKTF project using the methodology that I explained a while ago. So you may see a project here, S3 Infinity Bucket. So let me explain what it does. Here, I've defined an interface called stack props, and it takes in two arguments, which is the bucket name and the number of buckets. I've added this to the constructor here. So by default, we had the scope, the name, but I added another property here that contains number of buckets and bucket name of the type stack props. So let's go through. This may seem familiar. We're declaring a new AWS provider and providing the default region. And then we're doing a for loop here. I know what you're thinking. Who the hell does for loops like this? I do, so deal with it. So we're just making a for loop based on the number of buckets and then getting the index, right? We don't really care about the first argument. We're declaring here the bucket, which is the name of it. So we get the bucket name passed in and then the index as well from the for loop. So we import the S3 dependency here from the CDKTF provider AWS module. We give it an ID of S3 bucket and then the index. So it's really important that this ID is unique. We're going to receive errors, so that's why I sort of like use the index here to make it unique. And in the config, we just pass in the bucket here. And because of ES6, we don't have to do the key value thing. We just pass in the name of the bucket as the bucket name provided in the argument and the index of the for loop. So in here, when we declare the stack in the constructor, we provide the app, the name, which is AWS-CDK, but there's also a third argument because we made the changes to the constructor, which is the bucket name AWS-Terraform-CDKTF-bucket. And let's try to make 50 buckets. So I think we're capped at around 100 buckets per account. But let's say if you asked Uncle Bezos nicely that you wanted like 1,000,000 buckets, so you could scale the number of buckets to 1,000,000, right? So let's try to deploy this and we'll check it on my AWS account. Let me try to see. So I have currently one S3 bucket here. So the number of buckets, this is currently my AWS account. So let me just move that over to the other window and we want to add 50 more buckets. So let's do a CD KTF deploy. So after you deployed your infrastructure and you want to destroy it, basically remove every trace of it on your AWS cloud, you'd want to run CD KTF destroy, right? So we're just going to apply this change, CD KTF deploy. And here it's synthesizing. So we're just going to have to wait a bit. All right. So you can see here, plans to add 50 new things to our AWS cloud provider. So feel free to check it out. It's going to be fairly lengthy, but we're going to approve this change. And you can see it's creating 50 S3 buckets, right? Through the power of Typescript, CDKTF, AWS, and Terraform. So it's going to create all of these. We're going to verify. We're going to check the AWS account shortly. So it says apply complete, resources 50 added. And we're going to check our AWS account now. We're going to refresh. And you can see here we have 51 buckets. We used to only have one. And because of the Terraform change, we got like an additional 50 buckets. So is this helpful? I don't think so. But this is just one of the examples of like the many things you could do with CDKTF and use TypeScript or your favorite programming language as a basis to your infrastructure through code. That's it. Have a nice day. Thanks.